A little while back, we did a video on my favorite commercial real estate investing strategy called the neighborhood niche, where you actually pick a neighborhood and you focus almost exclusively on that, whether it's office, retail, industrial, doesn't really matter. You just focus on the neighborhood because there's so much synergy that you get out of that. And this strategy last year actually helped me acquire almost $35 million worth of commercial real estate. So in this video series, we're gonna do 2 or 3 more videos after this one. I'm gonna show you why I chose East Nashville and Dickerson Pike specifically to start investing in, the 5 reasons why I like Dickerson Pike, and how you can start using this strategy in your neighborhood as well. All right, now that we're back inside and it's a little bit warmer and I can actually think straight again, we're going to dive into the 5 reasons why I decided to really focus on the Dickerson Pike corridor. Number 1, East Nashville is growing, and really fast at that. So East Nashville is bound by the Cumberland River in the south and the east, I-65 in the west, and Briley Parkway in the north. It's a pretty good sized neighborhood if you're looking at it on a map. And it's witnessed exponential growth this economic cycle. I mean, there's pretty good reasons for that. Its proximity to downtown, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but also it has an unparalleled culture on this side of town, thanks in large part to its bar, restaurant scenes, music and artist scenes. It's just a great side of town that still has a lot of that local Nashville feel. So of course, when you combine that with the proximity to downtown, it really makes this neighborhood irresistible for both newcomers and Nashvillians that have been here for a long time alike. Now, as the residential neighborhoods develop, commercial is soon to follow, right? I mean, as soon as there are more rooftops within a neighborhood, there will be businesses that come to serve those residents. And East Nashville has experienced that pretty significantly. We've seen the development of not only multifamily, but a number of what Nashvillians call HPRs, horizontal property regimes. It's where you tear one house down and build 2 or 3 or 4 back based on the zoning that we have. So the housing density on this side of town has just increased. Now, all of that growth has certainly not been lost on Dickerson Pike, which has also experienced crazy growth compared to Gallatin, 5 Points, and some of those other areas, which are more established parts of East Nashville. Dickerson is still rather up and coming, but thanks in large part to a DADU, detached accessory dwelling unit overlay in Cleveland Park, which allows homeowners to build basically a mother-in-law apartment over their garage. It's become one of the more desirable neighborhoods to buy in because it's still relatively affordable. It's close to downtown, and you can really build an accessory dwelling unit that allows you to make passive income or just take up more space on your own lot. So if you're looking to implement this strategy in your portfolio building, look for neighborhoods that have all of the growth factors, the growth potential. They're creating jobs, people are moving there. It's got some sort of unique culture that the rest of your city or town just doesn't have. Up next for Dickerson Pike specifically, there is a lack of previous development. Dickerson Pike was originally a booming corridor back in the 50s, 60s, because it was the major thoroughfare in and out of town, really heading north and south all the way to Chicago. So if you're a musician coming in to play at the Grand Ole Opry, you likely stayed at a hotel or motel on Dickerson Pike because you had, again, quick proximity to downtown, and you're not far from the Grand Ole Opry, which of course led to a lot of neon signage, booming retail and restaurants, which unfortunately fell off in the mid-60s with the development of Interstate 65. Running north and south through Nashville. Now all of a sudden, nobody had a reason to really drive down Dickerson Pike, which less traffic means less commercial clients, which means the commercial real estate is going to start to suffer. So tire shops and neighborhood markets and other types of retailers, commercial businesses like that, really took over the corridor to serve the clientele that still remained there. And many developers for years just neglected this side of town. Most of the development in Nashville has always happened south of downtown. So you look at Green Hills, Cool Springs, Brentwood, Franklin is where a lot of the focus was because most of the developers lived on that side of the river. And of course, that lack of demand meant that there were no projects developed over here. If you look up and down the corridor, a lot of the buildings were actually built in the 50s and 60s. So that means you've got smaller buildings that are primed to be torn down on some larger lots. That really means it doesn't take a whole lot for you to come in here and redevelop it. Whereas if you look at some of the more established corridors in the Nashville area, they have 3, 4, 5, 6+ story buildings. Well, it's not as easy to justify buying one of those buildings and tearing it down just to build something about that size, right? You would have to build something much, much larger to really justify paying that. Whereas Dickerson, you can kind of get the land and you're close to downtown. Now, with a lack of development comes a neighborhood that is really unlike most of the other neighborhoods that you'll typically work in. The neighborhood actually wants to see high density development going on this corridor, which is always fun to be a part of, especially if you are intentional about building it the right way like we are. We want to bring in small businesses into the area, and the council members, the neighborhood, they're all willing to work with us on increasing density if we need to. They actually have had several design shreds. There was a Dickerson North corridor study and a Dickerson South corridor study. Both of those studies essentially went through and asked the neighborhood, what would you like to see here? If this was going to be developed in an ideal world, what would you like to see? And the neighborhood actually ended up getting Dickerson Pike some of the highest density in the city of Nashville along this corridor. So the future plan for this thoroughfare is really exciting to me. So that was, of course, one of the major reasons we decided to focus on it. Yes, maybe the corridor is technically in its infancy now, but when you have neighborhood support and a city that's coming in and putting these overlays, you know what's going to be happening over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm not just investing in developing to make a quick buck and move on. I mean, most of our projects, we're hoping to hold on to them for as long as we possibly can. So watching that and riding that wave is going to be really good for our investment strategy. So look for corridors that have massive growth potential in your neighborhoods, and maybe just focus on a corridor. I mean, you could really niche down. Now, of course, we haven't done just that, right? I've got plenty of buildings over on Gallatin, which is the other major thoroughfare in East Nashville, but the majority of our stuff is on Dickerson. Interstate and thoroughfare connectivity. Now, in a city like Nashville, which if you're not familiar with our politics and what goes on here, we continue to have horrific traffic issues because we keep voting no on transit referendums. Now, it doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you're on, if you're pro-transit or against transit, that creates a strong desire to live in the neighborhoods that are close to downtown or close to where you plan to work and play, right? Because if it's going to take you 45 minutes to drive to work every day and you only live 2 miles from downtown, why would you live in that neighborhood? Maybe you're going to move into the neighborhood where your office is and where all the nightlife and the fun things to do are, so that you don't even have to ever leave your neighborhood. You know, there is a reason that live, work, play has been a buzzword for the past 10 years or so. People really do want to live in projects, and they even, niche it down further than that. So not just in neighborhoods, but developments. You look at the Domain in Austin and Atlantic Station in Atlanta, and really you never have to even leave those developments if you don't want to. They're providing everything that any tenant, any resident could ever want on site, which again just creates this synergy. The retailers want to be there with the apartments, right? The apartments want to be where they can just walk downstairs and go to a cafe and work for the day, or take their dog to a nice park. So that leads us back to these neighborhoods that actually have very strong interstate and thoroughfare connectivity. If people want to live in a cool neighborhood like East Nashville, again, you've got the food and the beverage scene going on over here, as well as the arts and everything else, which I love being a part of. But maybe you don't have the option, you have to work downtown. Well, you could live in East Nashville, and specifically along Dickerson Pike, because you've got I-65, Briley Parkway, Dickerson, Gallatin, Ellington Parkway, East and West Trinity Lane. It's very easy to get just about anywhere in the city without getting into a traffic jam, and you have multiple options, right? You don't just have to take I-65 if you want to go to the Nations. You could take Briley Parkway. So if there is a wreck or something like that, you can at least get around it. There are other pockets in Nashville where you just don't have an option and you're stuck on that one thoroughfare, and that causes a lot of issues. Skyline Views, number 4. So Nashville's rolling hills can call for creativity when it comes to development, because let's be honest, developing on a hillside is not always the easiest. but they also provide for outstanding views of downtown. So Dickerson is very interesting in the sense that it doesn't have an abundance of crazy hillside like Bellevue does, but it does have gently sloping hills that actually rise as you leave the Nashville basin, right? So as you go north along Dickerson Pike, it actually goes up. And that creates this really unique phenomena with, you know, when it's combined with smaller buildings on the corridor. It could change at some point, but you have skyline views for almost the entirety of Dickerson Pike. Y'all were just sitting at the top of my office building, and you can see the skyline from there. This is only technically a two-story office building with a garden level, right? And we're at the very north end of Dickerson. There are not many places in Nashville where you get to see that, because typically the hills will actually end up getting in the way when you get this far out of downtown. And who wouldn't want to live somewhere that's close to town that has beautiful views that will likely never be impeded, because you're on a corridor that's nowhere near any other commercial districts, right? So there will be high density development immediately along the corridor, but there won't be anything else really off of it besides neighborhoods, right? So those will always remain. Always is a very strong word. Those will likely always remain, single, 2, 3 stories, because they're residential, right? So you'll always have, likely always. So you'll likely always have this beautiful view at vista of not only downtown, but all of the neighborhoods surrounding you, which you can see from the drone footage that we shot today, just flying around Dickerson Pike. I mean, it's not very dense, and you can see how close it is to downtown. Now, that kind of leads me on another tangent here. One thing that I hear all the time is that Nashville is overdeveloped. How can people, possibly keep developing here? Well, look at New York City. New York City is a million times, I don't know the actual numbers, but it's way more developed than Nashville is, and they continue to find ways to build skyscrapers and build towers. Look at how much green and open space there is almost immediately outside of Nashville. Where in your city can you go that has that much green space immediately outside of downtown? Even if it's not necessarily a desirable market today, in 5-10 years, if you're in the pattern of growth, you're going to be buying something that's likely going to increase in value just because of everything else that's heading towards you, even if you never do anything with the property. Now, we've talked about this one and just about every single other one, but I do believe it is probably the most important for you is the downtown proximity. How close are you to your downtown core, right? Because you may not have the most residents necessarily living in the downtown core, but that is the central business district. If you're in Nashville, that is where people go to play, right? We've got Broadway. That's a 5-block radius of craziness. It also has some of the biggest office buildings in town, right? I mean, it's the most centralized location for every surrounding suburb in the Nashville area. Now, if you are investing in the neighborhoods that I call them commercial core adjacent, a lot of developers will call, I got distracted by that. Maybe I shouldn't put my phone over here when I'm doing vlogs for you guys. That's actually kind of how much more comfortable I've gotten with doing these. A little more personal, and we're gonna just keep it that way. But anyway, if you are investing in what I call the commercial core or the urban core adjacent, those are all the neighborhoods that immediately surround the urban core, those neighborhoods are never not going to be very desirable. Again, going back, never is a very strong word, but you think about why everybody wants to hang out downtown. There's just this density of activity. And you look at New York City, right? I mean, that's always been one of the biggest things that New York City has had going for it, is it's 24 hours a day. There's always something to do. That's very similar to what happens in downtown cores, especially if you're in a thriving city like Nashville. There are other cities like Denver and Salt Lake City, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Austin, Texas that are very similar to that now, that are called 18-hour cities. So we're not quite 24-hour cities, but we're 18 hours. We're almost there. So you really have an option of doing kind of whatever you want within the city and experiencing a little bit of everything that metropolitan area has to offer, which is pretty exciting. I mean, look, like 5 minutes from here, we can hang out in pastures with cows. And we're also, right down the street from where Oracle is building an 8,500 employee, 65-acre campus. That's what I love about Nashville. That's what I love about these kind of mid-sized cities. But there you have it. Those are the 5 reasons I decided to specifically invest on Dickerson Pike using my neighborhood niche strategy. So go out, find a city within your neighborhood that kind of relates to everything that we talked about today, and leave me a comment and let me know what you end up doing with it. Are you going to start using the neighborhood niche strategy? Is there any aspect of this that's confusing or you don't understand? Leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation about it.